Please welcome back to the stage the President and CEO of the Truman Center for National Policy, Jenna Ben-Yehuda.
How are we doing so far? Are you still with us? It's not a Truman conference without hundreds, if not thousands of gallons of coffee. We supply it. It's your obligation to drink it. So thank you for sticking with us. What a day, huh? And I learned some things about Geneva, Wisconsin that I never knew and maybe wish I didn't. But a cautionary tale, to be sure, and a good reminder that history is all around us. Speaking of history, that was a fantastic conversation between Ambassador Thomas Greenfield and Jonquilyn. Thank you so much again, Jonquilyn. And the entire the entire team at Vox for partnering with us. This is year 2 together working with Vox, and they've been tremendous. We are not done with Ambassador Thomas Greenfield yet, because now we get to what is one of, I think, the most special and cherished parts of our TrueCon tradition, which is the presentation of our award for exceptional moral courage in public service. Every year at TrueCon, we give this award to recognize a public servant whose values have led them to do what's right, even when doing so might have been unpopular or posed personal risk. We've been thrilled to present this award to Lieutenant Colonel, now retired, Alexander Vindman, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, and last year to our very own United States Ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. Our tradition, which makes for very challenging scheduling, as you might imagine, is for the previous recipient to present the award to the newest honoree. And we're very glad to continue that tradition this year. So, without further ado, let me welcome back again to the stage Ambassador Thomas Greenfield.
I can't really see you all with all this light. Let me thank President Ben-Yehuda for that reintroduction. You know, I was honored last year to receive this prestigious award at the time from Mayor Bowser. It really was a true honor. It is now my great honor to pass the baton of the Truman Award for Exceptional Moral Courage in public service to Representative Jamie Raskin. Representative Raskin has one of the most remarkable careers in public service in this country's history. For more than 25 years, he served as a constitutional law professor at American University. There, he taught some of our nation's brightest minds the nitty-gritty details of the highest laws of our land. He also co-founded the Marshall Brennan Constitutional Literacy Project, which now boasts 20 chapters around the country, all working with high school students to teach them about their constitutional rights. And he served as state senator in Maryland for a decade, where he took on issues of statewide importance, from the death penalty to the fight to legalize same-sex marriage. Representative Raskin was elected to Congress in 2016, and his meteoric rise afterwards was born not from ambition, but from a deep sense of service. This personal and political trauma collided, Jamie lost his remarkable 25-year-old son, Tommy, to depression. The day after Tommy's burial, January 6, 2021, Jamie was in the Capitol with one of his daughters and his son-in-law when the insurrectionists attacked. The title of Raskin's book on the subject sum it up in one word: unthinkable. And yet Raskin was armed with Tommy's last words, his specific instructions to look after each other, the animals, and the global poor. And that is exactly what the congressman has done. In fact, he has been one of our country's most prominent and powerful defenders of democracy and all the good it does in the world. As the lead impeachment manager for the Senate trial of President Trump, Raskin brought together a sober, compelling, and dutiful case. He took the time to lay out the facts and not only ensured the public knew exactly what happened, but gave us the gift of the truth so that we could process and heal. For his brave efforts to stand up for the Constitution and everything we hold dear, the New Yorker declared him Person of the Year. Representative Raskin has continued that work on the United States House Select Committee on the January 6th attack, bringing his deep constitutional expertise to bear on the role of far-right extremists in inciting the coup on our Capitol. As if this were not enough, late last year, Jamie was diagnosed with lymphoma. We would have understood if he had said enough was enough, that he had served his country well, and that he needed to focus on healing. But Jamie kept serving. After the chemotherapy took his hair, he kept showing up, asking questions, holding investigations, writing legislation, and serving his constituents, all in his fashionable bandanas. He has one on today. And we were all relieved and grateful when last month he rang the bell and announced the cancer was in remission. Let's give him a hand of applause. Last year, during my own acceptance speech for this award, I said that the greatest challenges inspire the greatest courage. I can think of no one who has faced greater challenges or who has inspired greater courage than Jamie Raskin. Jamie, I admire you so much. You are bravery in human form, and it is truly a privilege to present you with this award.
Well, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, thank you for those lovely remarks, and I want to thank the Truman Center for this high honor. I am moved beyond measure and certainly beyond justification to receive this award, but I must confess that I'm filled with... I didn't know if the hecklers or the music was going to get me first. I'm filled with some dissenting thoughts that I just wanted to articulate by way of accepting this award. And the first is that in an existential and psychological sense, I didn't really experience myself as having any choice in doing the things that I did in the kind stories that the ambassador told. I felt much more a sense of historical and political and psychological necessity and inevitability. And the thought of courage didn't really come to mind. And I suppose I walk around with the values that I was raised with and I was educated on, as we all do. And my dad used to say to us kids when we were growing up, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. And so what you generously describe as courage might be better described as guilt, or perhaps a certain kind of civic self-respect, or maybe even more extravagantly, a certain kind of pride in our democracy and our Constitution, and a sense of indignation that people would purport to trample them. But more fundamentally, I think that moral courage in political life is far better seen in collective terms than individual terms. And I do see extraordinary courage in the work of the January 6th committee and our amazing staff, in the 232 Democratic and Republican members of the House of Representatives who assembled to vote to impeach Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection against the Union 1 week after our chamber was stormed, and the 9 members of the House impeachment team who went over to the Senate and worked through the nights to deliver the evidence of that high crime and misdemeanor, and then the 57 Democratic and Republican members of the Senate who delivered the most sweeping bipartisan vote in American history to convict a president for committing crimes against the Republic. And above all, I see real moral and political courage in the civilizing movements of American history, in the millions of people who fought for all of the moral progress that's codified and built into the fabric of our Constitution. If you read the Constitution the way that I do, then the vast majority of the amendments we've had since the original Bill of Rights were democratizing, suffrage extending, civilizing amendments to the Constitution. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and the 14th Amendment gave us equal protection and due process, and the 15th Amendment banned race discrimination in voting, and the 17th Amendment shifted the mode of election of our senators from the legislatures to the people, and the 19th Amendment doubled the franchise in America by giving women the right to vote, and the 23rd Amendment gave people here in Washington, D.C. the right to participate, at least in presidential elections. The 24th Amendment banned poll taxes in our elections, and the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18 in the country. So the overwhelming trajectory of our national determination, embodied in the preamble of the Constitution, to form a more perfect union, has been towards this magnificent progress, making us the world's greatest multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious constitutional democracy on the planet Earth. That's who we are, and you can read the record of it, the chronicle of it, in the Constitution itself. And I would go further, and I would follow Lincoln in saying that the nation began not really with the Constitution, which was flawed in many ways because of the fateful compromise at the beginning with slavery, but rather with the Declaration of Independence, which set forth the unalienable rights of the people, the radical principle of the democratic consent of the governed, and then the founding idea that all men, and we would say today women, are created equal. And if we ask in what sense all of us are created equal, when we know some are born wealthy, and some are born impoverished, and some are born in great mansions, and some are born homeless, and some are born tall, and some are born short. With all of these different social and natural endowments, in what sense are we all born equal? Well, we are all born equal in terms of our moral capacity. All of us can choose to do good or to do evil. All of us can choose to stand with the small d Democrats of the world or with the autocrats, the kleptocrats, the plutocrats, and the theocrats. All of us can choose to act with solidarity and compassion or with cruelty and snobbery and indifference. All of us can choose whether to advance a public philosophy which says that government must be an instrument of the common good in every society, or the government should be an instrument for private self-enrichment for the people who get into public office and for their families and for their friends and for their political self-entrenchment. I know a story about Jimmy Hoffa, which my dad once told me, which really crystallizes this point about the necessity of moral choice. And Hoffa, was subpoenaed to go before the Senate subcommittee on racketeering and organized crime, and I think it was Bobby Kennedy, who was the one of the counsels on the committee, who said to him something to the effect of, well, Mr. Hoffa, you know that as the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and the Secretary General of the Mid-Atlantic Teamsters Pension Fund and all of these offices, that a man of your great office and power is capable of doing both very great good and very great evil. And Hoffa leaned into his microphone and he said, I intend to live up to both of my responsibilities. So it's up to us, are we going to live up to our responsibilities to do good and evil, or just our responsibility to do good? And this is what matters, and this is why we are all, in fact, in our great country, created equal. We get to choose. Finally, the talk of moral courage makes me a little uncomfortable as an elected official, because everyone understands how the complexity of making political choices in a radically unjust and violent world, and the structural necessity of making short-term legislative compromises, and the long-term demands of active moral engagement and social progress collide constantly every day in our public life. None of us can get it right every time. And it's often impossible even to fully understand the moral consequences and meanings of our actions until long after they've taken place. To act in politics is, by definition, to take responsibility not only for advancing your ideals, but also for trying to confront in different ways the many threads of injustice and cruelty that make up the fabric of our world. And I'll give you an example of this. I'm a member of Congress who's been an ardent champion of the people of Ukraine in their extraordinary struggle to defend their national sovereignty and their democracy against the lawless and bloody imperial aggression of Vladimir Putin. And I believe that the democratic nations and movements of the world and everyone supporting freedom and human rights and the rule of law have a deep interest in repelling and ending Russia's atrocity-filled aggression against the Ukrainian people. Ukraine must win in its struggle for freedom and democracy today. We are all invested in that. And I've strongly advocated and voted for every form of assistance to Ukraine, economic, financial, military, security, strategic, humanitarian, diplomatic, and most of it has been in the form of military and security assistance. Billions of dollars to fight a just and defensive war against Putin's bloody attack on the people of Ukraine. And yet, the fact that I'm a passionate champion for President Zelensky and Ukraine's side in Putin's war does not mean that I favor the unjust wars that we have fought and initiated, like the war in Iraq, which was built on lies. It caused hundreds of thousands of casualties. It cost the American people more than $1 trillion. And it expanded the power of the tyrannical theocrats of Iran, not just in Iraq, but throughout the region. So the fact that I favor military and strategic assistance to Ukraine against Putin's invasion does not mean I support a blank check for what President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. And I have repeatedly voted against military budgets that are bloated, opaque, filled with waste and fraud, and are far removed from the defense of the land, the people, and the allies of the United States. In this sense, if you believe, if you believe in just wars of defense, as I do, but you also understand, as our founders did, the dangers to liberty posed by bellicose militarism and imperial aggression, then intellectual honesty compels us to articulate the fact that war remains a dangerous threat to humanity, and that war, as I hope Vladimir Putin is coming to realize every single day, doesn't really work anymore as an instrument of social domination of other peoples, much less as an instrument of effective policy making, if it ever did. But the difficulty of acting effectively and unjustly in a world still beset by frightful violence and militarism does not make our ethical imperatives and guideposts irrelevant in politics or in the conduct of foreign and domestic policy and defense policy. On the contrary, it makes these principles absolutely central. When I first got into politics back in 2006, I was running for the state Senate, and I went out on my front porch in a sub-freezing January morning, and I laid out everything that I wanted to do, like pass marriage equality, abolish the death penalty in our state, pass America's first national popular vote law, decriminalize marijuana, and enact tough anti-drunk driving laws. And a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, "Jamie, I loved your speech, great speech, but one thing, take out everything you've got in there about gay marriage, because it's not going to happen, it's never going to happen, even the gay candidates don't talk about it, and it makes you sound like you're really extreme, like you're not in the political center." And this was an early moment of truth for me in my first campaign, because this kind woman had been standing for an hour in freezing cold weather, and I certainly didn't want to offend her. I didn't have that many attendees with me that day at my kickoff rally. And my 3 kids were there, and I remember my son Tommy looking at me to see how I would answer. And I sort of had an epiphany at that moment. I said, I want to thank you for telling me that, because it made me realize it's not my ambition to be in the political center, which blows around with the wind. It's my ambition to be in the moral center. And that's why I call myself a progressive. Our job is to find what's right, the best that we can, and then to bring the political center to us. And that's my vision of what politics is. In that campaign, my favorite story is when I first announced, one of the local political commentators from our local newspaper in Montgomery County said that Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible, because I was running against a 32-year incumbent who was the president pro tem of the Senate and the boss of our local political machine. And he said Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. And 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. And there was another article in the Washington Post quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable, because the pundits are never wrong, So we went from impossible to inevitable in 9 months. But I like to tell the young people in our democracy summer program, that in politics, nothing's impossible, nothing's inevitable, everything is just possible through the democratic arts of education and organizing and mobilizing people for change. And I was delighted that when I went to the state Senate and I spent a decade there, we were able to get done every single thing that I said I wanted to participate in announcing my candidacy. And then I ran for Congress, and I was elected the same night Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And I came to Congress, and I'm very proud of the things that our majority accomplished in the 117th Congress, like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and dramatic reductions in the cost of prescription drugs and the Medicare program and a record historic investment in climate action and all of that. But the truth is, for most of my time since I've assumed federal office, I've been involved in the work of defending constitutional democracy, defending the rule of law, defending the freedoms contained in the Bill of Rights. And so in politics, sometimes you play offense and sometimes you play defense. But the key thing is not to be shy about your convictions. I once had a very brief conversation with Carl Russa Bagigna, who was the manager of the Hôtel des Mille Collines in Rwanda, the subject of the movie Hotel Rwanda, about the Hutu genocide against the Tutsis that took place back in 1994. And he and his family were responsible for saving more than 1,000 people's lives. And I got the chance to ask him a question, and I said, you know, what was the difference between you and the people who didn't act to shield people and protect people during the course of the genocide? And he said, the answer just astonished me. I've never been able to forget it. He said, a lot of people walk around with guilt and shame about something that they've done in their past, and that makes them feel that they can't do anything good in the present. It paralyzes them. But I realized, although I had done some things I wasn't proud of in my life, that I still had the power to act to help a lot of people now. You don't have to be perfect in order to do good. What a powerful lesson that is. How many people do feel disabled by virtue of something that they've done in the past or something that's happened to them? And what he was saying was, you can't let that stand in the way of your doing the things that the world needs you to do now. I came across a passage in Rousseau's Confessions, which echoes this thought. He said, how often audacity and pride are on the side of the guilty, and shame and embarrassment are on the side of the innocent. So don't be overly ashamed and embarrassed just because you're one of the good people and you did something wrong once or something bad happened to you. We need you out there fighting hard. Ben Franklin said, if you make yourself a sheep, the wolves will eat you. But don't make yourself a sheep. Fight hard for the achievements of civilization. Fight hard for the achievements of constitutional and political democracy in America. It's not incumbent upon you to finish the work, the Mishnah says, but neither are you free to evade it. I'll close with the words of two great Americans. One, a Marylander, Frederick Douglass, born about an hour away from here on a slave plantation at the Wye River plantation. And he escaped from slavery to become one of America's great freedom fighters, a leader through the Civil War and the Reconstruction. And Douglass said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. The struggle may be moral or material, or moral and material, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. So there's a message to you from a great Marylander from the 19th century. And I'll leave you with the words of the great Tom Paine, a moral visionary, a globe-trotting Democratic patriot who had some things in his background he wasn't proud of, but he went on to write the pamphlet that would take America by storm and kick off the American Revolution. He arrived in our country just 2 years before the Revolution and fell in love with the promise of America. You know, he said that America, if it realized its destiny, he said, would become an asylum to humanity. Not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people fleeing from political, religious, and economic oppression from all over the world. But in 1776, when the revolution was happening and, you know, people weren't sure whether you could really make democratic self-government work, whether you could really found a nation based on the idea of the rights of the people instead of the divine right of kings. And so Paine, in this pamphlet called The Crisis, wanted to write something that would give people heart, that would encourage them. So I'm just going to update the language a little bit at the instruction of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, because she said that Tom Paine was a feminist, and that he was, and he wouldn't mind. So, but he wrote these words. He said, "These are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country, but everyone that stands with us now will win the love and favor and affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. So let's make that victory ours, and thank you very much.
Congressman Raskin, thank you. You have, as the saying goes, taken us to church and synagogue, and maybe also to law school a little bit this afternoon with your remarks.
Well, they say you can take the law professor out of the classroom, but, you know.
And I got here without the LSAT, so thank you for that. And also this is constituent services if I've ever seen it. So as a Montgomery County resident, also thank you for being here. We get to have a conversation here for a few minutes, and we'll invite all of you to join in. And so you've got hopefully a really good question you've been thinking about today, because we had an earlier panel on political polarization. We have members in the Truman community who themselves are fighting neo-Nazis online and in person and bringing them to court. And there are a lot of nasty folks kicking around out there, it turns out. And extremism feels closer than it has for many of us in our lifetimes. Just in Montgomery County, we've talked about all the swastikas that appear constantly, it seems. And it feels like a part, certainly, of the day job of state, local, and national electeds. So you talked a little bit about some of the legacy of history. What do you say to people about where to start when it feels so big?
So, thank you for the question. The first thing is that when I went to college, we were taught about American exceptionalism, and having lived through January 6th and seen what the plans were for staging a political coup against the election, overturning the election, and having seen the violent insurrection and people chanting, hang Mike Pence, and where's Nancy, and so on, I came to believe that what I learned about American exceptionalism was wrong. America is not exceptional because we're immune to fascism or we're immune to racism. I think this is Rachel Maddow's point. America's exceptional just because we have ideals that were articulated even in the breach at the beginning and have been articulated through successive social and political movements, insisting that this is a country that belongs to everybody. That's what makes us so exceptional. And, I've been thinking about courage ever since you guys, sent me your letter. And I was checking out John F. Kennedy's Profiles of Courage. And there's kind of a myth that runs through that book. And the myth is that people only show conviction or courage when they're going against the grain of the majority. So every case that he had of a senator or representative who was a paragon of courage was somebody who went against their party. And I agree that that can be one demonstration of courage, but I think that we need to praise people who act with conviction and courage even when they go with the majority. The vast majority of the American people reject insurrection and treason and violent coups against the government, and we need people standing up for the majority against the tyranny of the minority today. And that's something, because there were lots of threats against different people, a lot of my colleagues, and that's not to take anything away from Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, who showed extra conviction and extra courage in what they did. But everybody who stands up for democracy and human rights and law, should be embraced for doing that. And so I think that we have to use the word fascism because it's obviously a loose all over the world today, with all of its attendant ideological, viruses, racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny, and all those things are out there. But that gives us all the opportunity to go and fight for the things that we believe in every single day. And, I tell the young people, they're growing up in a much tougher time than I grew up in, much tougher, but they also have the opportunity to prove their love for the things they believe in.
Just recently, we started getting some convictions, some sentencing, big news surrounding the January 6th insurrection, of course. Can you talk a little bit about, especially in your role having served as impeachment manager, what these convictions mean for the conversation and where it goes from here and why they're so important?
Well, the convictions are remarkable. Hundreds and hundreds of convictions now, more than 1,000 cases brought. They show that the American system of justice and the rule of law and the presumption of innocence and proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt before a jury of your peers works. Our justice system works in America. And, there are people who would like to say that, and you know who they are, I don't have to name them, well, it's all political. It's whether it's my judge or your judge, a Democrat judge or a Republican judge, and all that stuff's out the window. Our justice system is working in these cases, which is why people are so vehemently denouncing them. That's one thing it proves. And the other thing I think it proves is the complete nonsense of claims being made about the Second Amendment. Now, why do I say that? Because pretty much every day that we have any discussion about gun violence or the most recent gun massacre or the Second Amendment, I've got colleagues who get up and they say, the purpose of the Second Amendment is to allow the people of the United States to overthrow the government. And everybody knows that that's the purpose of the Second Amendment, even though the Second Amendment doesn't say anything about insurrection or rebellion or revolution. None of that stuff is in the Second Amendment. All it says is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And oftentimes my colleagues will get up and say, Raskin wants us to repeal the Second Amendment. No, I don't want them to repeal the Second Amendment. I just want them to read the Second Amendment. That's all I'm asking for. But they will go on and say, but that's the whole meaning of our Constitution. Well, I don't have time to get into all of it now, but let me just give you a few counterexamples that also support the fact that we have hundreds of these convictions and not a single one thrown out on the grounds that they had a right to overthrow the government. They had a Second Amendment right to engage in insurrection. But look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15. The Congress has the power to call forth the militias from the states in order to repel invasions and suppress insurrections. That's right there in the Constitution itself. The Republican Guarantee Clause. The Congress shall guarantee to the people of the states a Republican form of government and assist the states in suppressing domestic violence and repelling invasions. The Treason Clause, which says that treason shall consist of levying war against the United States. Well, what is violent insurrection where you come and attack our officers and put them in the hospital, if not levying war against us? But if they have some counterexample to that, and the only one I get from them is, well, Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death, which was a nice slogan by a Virginian anti-federalist who voted against the Constitution, but otherwise has nothing to do with constitutional interpretation. But if they've got some argument, why is it that none of these people has had his or her indictment quashed or their conviction thrown out on the grounds that they've got a right to overthrow the government? Then they say, well, what about the Declaration, which says, when in the course of human events, if a government turns tyrannical, you can overthrow them. Absolutely right. I agree completely with that. As a matter of natural law, says Thomas Jefferson, we did not cite the Magna Carta or the British Constitution to say we have the right to overthrow you. If you want to appeal to the decent opinions of mankind, as Jefferson did, you want to pledge your fortune and your livelihood and your lives to other people in common cause and trying to overthrow a tyrant, you can do it, but you do it on your own time and your own dime. And if you attack our Constitution and our government and attack our police officers and we catch you and you don't win, you're going to jail in the United States of America, okay?
Well, the lunchroom must be a really interesting place at the office, no doubt. We have some questions in the audience, and we have some mic runners who were going to do their duty here.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all you do. My question is, as we head towards 2024 and the rhetoric is already going up, and it looks like we potentially could be heading towards a Biden versus Trump again, what gives you hope that there's not going to be a January 6th again, or that we don't have, I come from Michigan where we got very close to not having ballots certified even before getting to the Capitol. So what gives you hope? And then there's a whole room here of people that want to protect democracy. So what can we do as we lead to 2024 to make sure that we do not allow that to happen?
Well, thank you. What gives me hope is the people in this room. What gives me hope is everybody out in America who's fighting for democracy. And the majority of the people absolutely favor democracy, which is why the people who want to overthrow elections have to use things like gerrymandering of our state and federal districts, illegitimate right-wing judicial activism, voter suppression, manipulation of the antiquated electoral college, which I do think is obsolete. And by the way, defending democracy doesn't mean defending democracy just as it is. It means making sure that democracy is moving forward. It's always an unfinished product. It's always a work in progress. And how about in the 21st century, we elect the president the way we elect governors, senators, mayors, and everybody else. Whoever gets the most votes wins. Because the Electoral College today is not just an undemocratic institution, which has given us 5 popular vote losers in our history as president, twice in this century alone, in 2016. It's dangerous, and we saw that on January 6th. So what gives me hope that we're not going to have it? What gives me hope is our resolve and determination not to let it happen. We learned a lot of lessons about fortifying the Capitol, and we made some improvements in the Electoral Count Act. But remember, it's not going to repeat itself in exactly the same way that it happened last time. There will be other efforts to suppress the vote, to pull a fast one in the state legislatures, to flip a result from one candidate to another. And so we need to fortify American political democracy at every level: local, county, state, federal, all of it. And the people who are fighting for that are what give me hope. And I'm convinced that we are still in the thick of this struggle, as you clearly imply. I would like to think it was over. I mean, we had 57 votes in the Senate, which sounds like a pretty resounding majority, but he beat the constitutional spread. I mean, it was 10 votes short of the 2/3 we needed, the 67. So we're plunged back into it again, and it's not a pretty sight, but the more difficult the struggle, the more glorious will be our victory when we get through it.
I'll turn to our mic runners here.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Cooper. I'm over here with my hand. You cast an amazing vision for what you see America bringing to the citizens in this country. But I also lived in Alabama for 4 years, And I met many people there who do not see that and don't see the benefit coming to them. And those people probably aren't going to listen to the things that you have to say. But if they did for 10, 20 seconds, what would you tell them?
So I'm sorry, which people are you referring to?
The ones who don't see the benefits of a democratic society, who use terms like swamp and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, but what I liked about Rachel Maddow's presentation was she was showing that we've made all of this extraordinary democratic progress in America, even though there have been those at every point who have tried to stop us, who've tried to violate civil liberties and prevent these expansions of the franchise and political participation. So, I would talk to them about our magnificent history, but if it doesn't work with them, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'll talk to their kids, because I have a lot of faith in the young generation today, which is, way beyond the racism and the anti-Semitism and the homophobia and the immigrant bashing. They're also a little bit beyond grammar, too, at this point. That's a different problem, That's a small price to pay for their values, which are great. And I think that, there's huge generational change coming to America. And I feel, now my kids are in their 20s, and, I turned 60. I know, that's young, at least in some parts of Congress, I feel our job, speak for myself and my friends in our generation, our job is to defend what we've got and to get the democracy moving again in the right direction. Because, while we're fighting over things that we thought had been settled in the last century about fascism and authoritarianism and repression, the fact is that really the world should be unifying to deal with the nightmare of climate change. And the young people understand that's we've got to save democracy first so we can save the species and the climate in this century. And we don't have a lot of time, so we've got to act fast. And we should not give up on anybody, as you're suggesting. We should reach out to everybody. But if it's taken too much time, we got to talk to other people, because we just need majorities every place, And I'll tell you one funny story, because I've got a friend who I love, who I was in Congress with the first term, named Lamar Smith from Texas, and he was chair of the Committee on Science and Technology. And so I spotted him as a Republican I could be friends with, because he was chair of the Committee on Science. And, not everybody believes in science where I work. And but one day we were sitting on the floor, we were in our committee, and I said to him, Lamar, we can disagree about taxes and stuff, but when we get down to it, you guys have got to get serious about climate change, because it's the whole future of our civilization and our species we're talking about. And he said, well, Jamie, you got your scientists and we got our scientists. And I said, well, that's not really how science works, It's not like rival party teams. I said, let's go to we had a computer there. I said, let's go to all the websites of the great scientific installations in Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. So we went to the NOAA website, an FDA website, and NIH. And I said, all of the professional scientists agree that climate change is real. And it's this dagger pointed at the neck of humanity. And he goes, well, let me tell you about professionals. Professionals built the Titanic. Amateurs built Noah's Ark. Okay? So I thought about that for a second, and I was like, wait, does that mean, you want amateurs flying you back to Texas this weekend, or performing heart surgery on someone? So, some of this at this point, is just rooted in ideology of parties. By the way, I think Lamar has developed in his thinking about climate change a lot, which is really good. And he sent me a campaign contribution when he left Congress too. So and he knows where I am on climate. So I do think that in the sweep of American history, everybody's going to come, most everybody. I mean, not the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and, people convicted of, seditious conspiracy against the government. We're not going to convince them. But the vast majority of the people are coming along. That's got to make us happy. That's got to make you happy. And it's just a race between the very clear will of the majority and some antiquated political institutions and practices that we've got.
Well, that's an excellent reminder and an inspiring note on which to close, that there are people out there, a lot of them in this room, fighting for this work, and that progress is our history, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Everybody, let's get another round of applause for Congressman Raskin. Truly a champion for Truman values and a congressional mensch, if there ever were one. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Folks, we've had a very full day here, and I don't want to stand between you and freedom. So I will be brief and really just say thank you for being here, for the good questions, for engaging, for introducing yourselves to each other, for connecting. And let's give it up for our tremendous day that we've had today. I learned early in my career, always be nice to the guys on the mics. We've got a great team here with Scott Circle and our production team. Jasmine, who has been a total star working backstage. There are a lot of folks who you haven't seen because everything has worked so smoothly, and we appreciate them. Our amazing Truman staff, thank you. It is as good a time as any to remind you that doing this costs money. And we count on all of you and your friends to support us. So you can do that at trumancenter.org/donate-TrueCon23. It's tax deductible. This is a Truman Center Day, and it makes everything here possible. And so we want to keep this continuing and growing and strong, and we appreciate your support. And to our Truman members who were on our panels today and introducing people and interviewing, thank you to all of our Truman member participants today. And to all of our Truman members here, don't have too much fun because we will see you bright and early tomorrow morning for the start of TrueCon Member Weekend. Thank you. All right, class dismissed.
Carry